It started on a Tuesday. Priya Nakamura had always been the kind of person who read the manual. She had carbon monoxide detectors on each floor of her apartment, one in the hallway outside the bedroom where her 6-month-old daughter, Emmy, slept, one in the kitchen, one in the living room. She tested them monthly. She changed the batteries on a schedule. She was a graphic designer who had spent 11 years doing layout and specification work, and she applied the same systematic approach to home safety that she applied to every project she took on. The apartment was a second-floor unit in a 1970s building in Columbus. She had lived there for 3 years. Ember was 8 years old. Orange tabby, short-haired, the kind of cat who had established fixed routines over those 8 years and deviated from them only when something was genuinely wrong. He slept on the same chair. He woke at the same time. He ate at the same time. He sat in the same afternoon sunspot. When Emmy was born 6 months ago, he had examined her twice from a distance of approximately 2 feet and then incorporated her into his routines with minimal adjustment, occasionally positioning himself on the foot of the bassinet, the way he had previously positioned himself on the foot of Priya's bed. At 10:15 that Tuesday evening, Ember jumped off his chair and walked directly to the kitchen. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that he returned to the living room 30 seconds later, sat beside Priya's feet, and meowed once. Ember was not a vocal cat. In 8 years, he had meowed perhaps a dozen times, and each time it had corresponded to something specific. A food bowl that had gone empty, a door he needed opened, once a moth that had gotten into the apartment and that he appeared to feel she needed to know about. Priya reached down and scratched behind his ear. He tolerated it for 4 seconds and then walked back to the kitchen. She was finishing a project deadline at midnight. She noted the behavior and returned to her screen. At 10:45, Ember was at her feet again, not sitting this time, standing, looking at her, then toward the hallway, then at her, then toward the hallway. She followed him. He went to the hallway outside Emmy's bedroom, sat, looked at the door, looked back at Priya. The carbon monoxide detector on the wall outside Emmy's room was silent. Its green indicator light was steady. Everything was fine. She opened the door. Emmy was sleeping. The room was warm. She closed the door, went back to her project. If you stay for stories about what animals sense before we do, you're in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. At 11:20, Ember walked to the CO detector in the hallway. He sat directly underneath it. He put one paw on the wall. He looked at Priya. She had a friend, Devika, who had cats. 3 of them. Devika always said cats were smarter than the technology. Priya had always smiled and let it pass. She was not a person who assigned animals intentions beyond what was observable. She took Ember down from his position at the wall. He stepped back up to the same location within seconds. She picked up her phone and Googled whether cats could detect carbon monoxide. The search results were mixed. There were forum posts. There were anecdotal reports. There were also several veterinary sources indicating that while cats could not smell CO directly, they could detect associated combustion byproducts, and that feline behavior changes in the presence of early-stage CO exposure had been documented. The cat might become agitated, attention-seeking, or unusually oriented toward the source. She reread the last clause, unusually oriented toward the source. Ember was sitting under the detector that was closest to the boiler room wall. She was standing in the hallway at 11:38 when she called the emergency line for her building's gas and utility service. The technician who arrived 22 minutes later, a man named Gerald, broad-shouldered, carrying equipment she did not recognize, found the fault within 8 minutes of entering the boiler room. The heat exchanger on the building's shared boiler was cracked, a hairline fracture 18 months old by his estimate. Possibly older. The boiler vented to a shared flue that ran through her second-floor unit's wall. At a certain operating threshold, which the boiler had crossed that evening as temperatures dropped outside, combustion gases were entering the building's ventilation supply at concentrations below the trigger threshold of standard residential CO detectors, below human olfactory perception, below sensor trigger, above what a cat with 200 million scent receptors optimized across millions of years for exactly this kind of chemical anomaly could detect. Has your cat ever done something you couldn't explain until it was the only thing that made sense? Tell us in the comments. These stories deserve to be heard. How long would it have taken, Priya asked, for the levels to reach something the detectors would catch? Gerald wrote something in his service log and did not look up immediately. When he did, his answer was precise in the way only someone who had seen the outcome of the situation was capable of being precise. At current escalation rate, probably 2 to 3 hours. Where's the infant's room? Then he finished his paperwork. Every guardian deserves to be recognized, even the ones who never asked for anything in return. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. They stayed at Devika's that night. Emmy slept in a borrowed crib. Ember circled the unfamiliar apartment twice, and then settled on the foot of the bed where Priya was lying in the dark. Not sleeping, running the timeline backward. 10:15, 10:45, 11:20. Each time she had not understood. Each time Ember had returned. He pressed his chin against her arm now, the specific weight of a cat who has decided you are where he is staying. She did not reach over. She just let him. The building's boiler was repaired over the following 2 days. The crack was 1.4 centimeters. The repair cost the building association $900. Priya went back to her apartment on Thursday. She carried Emmy in the carrier, and Ember walked ahead of her through every room. The same methodical circuit she had seen him do the day they first moved in. He stopped in the kitchen. He stopped in the hallway. He stopped at the boiler room wall. He turned around once, looked at her, and then went to his chair and sat down. Priya stood in the hallway and looked at the 3 carbon monoxide detectors on her 3 floors and the orange cat on the chair, and did not say anything for a long time. The next story is about an animal that refused to let a family sleep for 11 nights. On the 12th, they finally understood why. Subscribe so you're there when it posts.